This story is about a laundry worker named Jamila Brooks, who had spent years cleaning uniforms no one noticed until the day a renowned Japanese professor was humiliated at a luxury Boston hotel. In a single act of courage, Jamila broke her silence, revealing not only her linguistic brilliance, but the buried corruption in the hotel's hiring system. What unfolded next shattered assumptions, rewrote power dynamics, and proved that dignity isn't about position, it's about truth. You call yourself an international hotel, and you can't find one person who speaks Japanese. The voice echoed across the gleaming marble lobby of the Athena Royal Hotel in Boston, drawing glances from guests, staff, and executives alike. Standing stiff and composed in the middle of the chaos was Professor Aiko Nakamura, a globally respected educator visiting from Kyoto for a conference. But today, she wasn't being honored. She was being dismissed. For nearly 30 minutes, the hotel staff had tried and failed to understand her language. 3 translators stood nearby defeated, while the concierge fumbled with translation apps and hand gestures. Aiko remained poised, but her eyes sharp, intelligent, and narrowing with each passing insult, betrayed the truth she understood far more English than she let on. Behind the counter, Claire Hutchinson, general manager of the Athena Royal, paced back and forth like a wound-up clock ready to snap. "This is a hospitality disaster," she hissed under her breath. "We've got tech CEOs, dignitaries, and this woman is holding up check-in over what a room key and some soy milk." Her voice rose, now biting enough for everyone to hear. "This is America. If you're going to stay in a place like this, you need to speak the language." Guests turned away awkwardly, but no one said a word. Claire's energy dominated the room. Her blazer was crisp. Her posture screamed command. And yet, there was something fraying at the edges, something unraveling. Out of view near the service elevator, tucked between polished columns, Jamila Brooks adjusted the basket of freshly steamed linens in her arms. Her badge read, "Laundry, Support Services." Her uniform bore the fading logo of the hotel's rebranding 5 years ago, and no one ever looked her in the eye. But Jamila saw everything. From that quiet corner, she watched Claire's performative outrage, the translators defeated shrugging, and the silent battle behind Professor Nakamura's calm exterior. This wasn't the first time she'd seen someone powerful humiliated by cultural ignorance. But this time, the humiliation wasn't unintentional. It was designed. Sharp, targeted. Jamila had been working at the Athena for 5 years. Never once late. Never once acknowledged. But few knew she held a master's degree in linguistics and had once volunteered in disaster relief efforts in Miyagi, Japan. She didn't correct people who assumed she was uneducated. That invisibility was part of her survival strategy. But now, that invisibility was burning a hole through her chest. Her fingers gripped the edges of the linen basket tighter, and with each degrading word, Claire fired toward Aiko. A fire was building in Jamila's throat. She could no longer swallow. Claire barked again. "If she doesn't understand basic hotel policy, maybe she's not our kind of guest." The jab landed hard. Aiko's fingers curled slightly, gripping her briefcase tighter, her eyes still silent, but storming. That's when a young front desk agent, no older than 24, whispered, "We've tried Mandarin Thai, even some broken Korean. It's no use." Claire spun on her heels. "Get upstairs. I'll handle this." "Myself." From behind her cart, Jamila whispered aloud, almost to herself. "She's not even trying to understand her." The moment the words left her lips, she froze. One of the bellboys glanced at her. First time all day anyone noticed her voice. But Jamila didn't back down. Not this time. Something inside her shifted, something ancient and necessary. A quiet understanding that dignity, when crushed, too often finds a way to rise. Professor Nakamura suddenly began speaking fast and fluent. The words were unmistakably Japanese. The entire staff stood dumbfounded. Claire rolled her eyes dramatically. "Useless noise," she muttered loud enough to echo. That was the moment Jamila stepped forward. Her shoes made no sound on the marble. Her hands were still holding the towel, but her presence now filled the space like thunder. With the grace of someone who had spent her whole life waiting for this exact moment, she stepped into the light and looked straight at Aiko. And in perfect native-level Japanese Kyoto accent, and all Jamila said softly, "Tanaka-sensei, forgive them. They don't see what they're doing." The silence hit like a glass shattering on marble. The room stilled. Aiko blinked. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in deep, soulful relief. For the first time in 30 minutes, her face broke into a real expression recognition. Jamila had spoken not just her language, but her intention with care, with weight, and with honor. Claire blinked. "Wait, what did she just say?" The translators looked at each other, humiliated. One took a step back. Another whispered, "That was flawless." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Who the hell are you?" Her voice cracked. Jamila turned toward Claire slowly, her tone still calm. "I'm someone you've ignored for 5 years. But today, you can't afford to ignore me." And just like that, the marble floor Jamila used to mop became a stage. And the room, a courtroom, a theater, a reckoning. And none of them, not even Jamila herself, knew just how far the truth was about to go. Claire's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "You think you can walk out of the laundry room and just insert yourself into a guest issue?" Her voice was pitched with authority, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty, like she'd just felt the ground shift, and couldn't tell if it was a crack or an earthquake. Jamila didn't flinch. She looked her manager dead in the eye, and responded in English now, clear and unshaken. "I didn't walk out to insert myself. I walked out because someone needed to see her as a person." Around them, the air hung thick with the weight of what had just occurred. The marble lobby, usually bustling with luxury and ego, was frozen staring. The concierge's fingers hovered above his keyboard, motionless. A housekeeping supervisor clutched her clipboard against her chest. Even the bellhop, who always whistled off-key in the elevators, had gone still. And Aiko Nakamura. She stood tall, nodding slowly, not just at Jamila's words, but at her stance. Claire recovered just enough to hiss under her breath. "This is highly inappropriate. You're not trained in guest communication. You're not even—" She stopped herself, but the silence at the end of that sentence said everything. "You're not even supposed to be seen." Jamila's jaw clenched, but she didn't let the anger show. Not yet. She turned to Aiko and spoke again in Japanese this time, formally, apologetically, with nuance only a real speaker would know. "I deeply regret how you've been treated. If you give me a few minutes, I'll make sure your accommodations are handled properly." Aiko replied quietly, her tone warm with familiarity. "Your accent is from Kansai." Jamila smiled gently. "Miyagi originally. But I studied in Kyoto." Aiko's eyebrows lifted, amused and intrigued. "And now?" Here Jamila gave a slight shrug. "Sometimes the journey goes backwards before it moves forward again." Claire's voice broke the moment "You're done here." Her finger pointed toward the back corridors. "Get back to your floor, or consider this your last shift." But that's when Marcus, the senior concierge, and the only other black manager on staff, stepped forward. He had been silent until now, his eyes carefully tracking every movement, like a man trying to read a chessboard 3 moves ahead. "Claire," he said smoothly, "I believe Ms. Brooks just de-escalated what was quickly becoming a diplomatic crisis. Perhaps we should let this play out." Claire turned, fuming. "Let it play out. Are you serious? She's laundry." Marcus didn't blink. And yet she's the only one who understood the guest. The shock of that truth rippled through the staff. Some looked away guilty. Others stood straighter, suddenly wondering what else they hadn't noticed in 5 years of passing Jamila in the halls. "I'd like to speak to your director, Aiko," said clearly in English now, soft but powerful. "The one who oversees cultural engagement, if you have such a position." Claire blinked. That's me." Aiko tilted her head. "Then I'd like to file a formal complaint about the way I've been treated." and about why a woman like Ms. Brooks has been hidden in the basement while you supervise diversity programs from an office with glass walls." The words landed like thunder. Claire's cheeks flushed a dangerous red. "This is absurd," she spat. "You're making a spectacle out of nothing." "Nothing," Jamila asked gently, stepping forward again. "You mean speaking someone's language, acknowledging their presence, understanding their silence." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held steel. "I've spent years folding sheets, pressing uniforms, listening to executives talk like we're invisible. But we hear everything, Claire. Every word, every assumption." And then, Jamila pulled something from the pocket of her apron, a worn, folded letter. She handed it to Marcus. "2 years ago, I applied for the language support liaison role that was supposed to be created under the guest services pilot. HR said my file was incomplete, that I lacked qualifications, that I'd missed the deadline." Marcus unfolded the letter, brows furrowing as he read. "This is a recommendation from the Osaka Municipal Council. And my certification from the International Interpreters Network," Jamila added. "Both were in my file, until someone removed them." Claire's face stiffened. "That's ridiculous." But her voice trembled just slightly. Jamila's voice dropped, but it cut sharper than ever. "You needed someone who could make guests feel welcome. You just didn't want her to look like me." The silence that followed was different this time, not stunned or shocked, but heavy with realization. And in that stillness, Aiko reached into her own bag and pulled out a small black folder. For the record, she said, opening it to reveal her business card, "I am not just a visiting professor. I sit on the International Advisory Board for Multicultural Hospitality Accreditation. And I've been recording since I walked in." Claire's knees almost buckled. The atmosphere cracked open. But Jamila didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Because she knew this wasn't the end. This was the moment before the system blinked. Before it exposed the rot behind the marble. Before everything changed. And as Claire tried to steady her breath, her eyes meeting Marcus's uncertain ones, one unspoken truth filled the space. Jamila Brooks wasn't stepping back. She was just getting started. Claire's voice faltered as she stared at the card in Aiko's hand, the gold embossing glinting under the chandelier lights. Her jaw opened slightly, but no words came out. The gleam of polished marble beneath her feet felt suddenly unsteady, like the very floor she ruled had shifted without her permission. And Jamila. She stood motionless, not triumphant, but centered, poised. It wasn't revenge that kept her grounded, it was truth. And the truth was finally cracking through the shell of silence this hotel had spent years polishing. Claire stepped back instinctively, as if the small black folder in Aiko's hand carried radioactivity. You can't just—" "This is all being blown out of proportion," she stammered, trying to regain control. "This isn't about me. It's about protocol. About process." Marcus folded the letter Jamila had given him and tucked it into his jacket. "The process, Claire," he said slowly, "is exactly what's being questioned." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like thunder in that frozen lobby. That was when the assistant GM, Mr. Keller, came rushing down the grand staircase, holding his phone to his ear with one hand and clutching a hotel-issued folder in the other. His eyes locked on the small crowd forming and the visibly shaken Claire. "What's going on down here?" he asked, tension seeping through his polished tone. Aiko raised her hand calmly, with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding boardrooms on 3 continents. "I've submitted a real-time report to the advisory board. This hotel is now under immediate review." Mr. Keller's face blanched. Meanwhile, Claire tried one last time to pivot. "Let's step into the boardroom and resolve this like professionals," she said, attempting a hollow smile. But Jamila's voice rose soft and unyielding. "Professionals don't delete files to block opportunity. They don't bury people in linen closets when those people speak 5 languages." And then she added, "If this conversation goes behind closed doors, I disappear again." That line, "I disappear again," hung in the air like a spotlight. A bellhop clapped. Just once. Awkwardly. But it was enough. Enough for other staff, junior managers, even two interns at the reception desk, to realize something irreversible had taken place. Jamila Brooks had pulled a thread loose, and now the entire tapestry was unraveling. And yet, amid all of it, Jamila didn't lash out. She walked with measured calm across the lobby and stood at the very desk she had passed every day for 5 years, without acknowledgement. She set her badge down, laundry, support services, gently on the counter, not as a resignation, but as a declaration. Mr. Keller, face tight, gestured for everyone to clear the lobby, but Aiko held up her phone again. "Before we go anywhere," she said in perfect English, "I want to ask one question." She turned to Claire. "Do you know who originally reviewed Ms. Brooks' application for the liaison role?" Claire's lips pressed into a line. "That wasn't my department," she deflected too quickly. But Aiko tapped on her screen and read aloud, "Application reviewed and rejected by Claire Hutchinson. Reason, incomplete certification, insufficient external verification." Aiko looked up. That wasn't a clerical error. It was a professional burial. Jamila took a breath. She didn't want to be angry. Anger was easy. It burned hot and fast and left ashes. But what she felt now was different. She felt resolve. And something else, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Possibility. Claire tried again. "This wasn't personal. I was under pressure. We had too many guests, not enough time. The board was threatening to cut staff. I was being squeezed from every side." She looked not at Jamila, but at Marcus, now voice-breaking. "You know what that's like, don't you?" But Marcus didn't offer her a lifeline. He simply asked, "Did you lie?" Claire. That question echoed, and Claire, to her credit, didn't say no. She just looked down. Then something unexpected happened. Aiko stepped toward Jamila, not with authority, but with respect. "I want you to know," she said softly, "what you did here today is being written about. My assistant has already drafted a memo to 4 of our global partners. Your name will be included." Jamila blinked, stunned. "I didn't do this for recognition." Aiko nodded. "I know. That's why it matters." Just then, an alert pinged on Marcus's tablet. He glanced down, furrowing his brow. Then his eyes widened. "Claire," he said, turning the screen toward her, "you need to see this." It was a message from the parent company's HR director. Subject line, "Urgent. Formal review. Triggered by IAB submission." Beneath it, "Please prepare full hiring history for Jamila Brooks. Immediate audit underway. Regional VP notified." Claire's lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. The very system she had used to control others was turning inward, and she had no shield left. And still, Jamila didn't gloat. Instead, she turned to Marcus, her voice calm but firm. "If there's going to be a review, I want to be in the room." That line startled even Aiko. Claire blinked. "What?" Jamila repeated louder this time. "If this hotel is going to rethink how it hires, promotes and buries talent, I'm not watching from the back room. I'm going to help fix it." Mr. Keller, who had been standing like a statue, suddenly exhaled. "You're serious?" Jamila met his gaze. "I've never been more serious in my life." At that moment, with guests watching from balconies, with staff holding trays in suspended disbelief, and with Claire Hutchinson visibly unraveling in the middle of the floor she once ruled, one thing was absolutely clear. The person who had been invisible this morning was now the most powerful voice in the building. And behind Jamila's steady stare, something else began to stir, not just resolve, but the spark of a deeper truth. That this wasn't about her. Not anymore. This was about every voice that had been silenced before her, every file conveniently lost, every resume ignored because it didn't look like leadership. And if she had to burn down the whole illusion to make space for one more voice like hers, she would. "You're serious?" Mr. Keller had asked, almost as if the words themselves tasted foreign. Jamila didn't blink. "I've never been more serious in my life," she'd said. And now, standing beneath the soaring chandelier of the Athena Royal, the weight of her words echoed through more than just the lobby. Upstairs, behind a thick, glass-paneled conference room, the tone had shifted. Less than an hour had passed, but already a hastily assembled internal response team sat around a curved walnut table. Marcus, now acting as interim liaison for the investigation, pulled the HR audit report onto the central screen. Jamila stood near the window arms, folded still in her laundry uniform. She had refused to change. "I want them to see exactly who they've been ignoring," she'd told Marcus. Across from her sat Claire Posture, rigid eyes, unfocused. Her blazer was still perfect, but her face had changed. Gone was the thinly veiled superiority. What remained was something raw, exposed. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. And while she hated it, some part of her also seemed relieved. Marcus cleared his throat. The preliminary audit shows that 4 internal applicants were denied promotions due to what appears to be data suppression or unfiled documentation. All 4 were women of color. 3 were multilingual. 1, Ms. Brooks, had external certifications that were deliberately marked pending. A silence followed. Not stunned silence anymore, but institutional silence. The kind that signals power shuffling gears, grinding the sound of a machine reluctantly recognizing its own decay. Claire finally spoke. "Do you know what it's like to be told that your job isn't safe unless you make the right choices for branding?" Her voice cracked. "They don't want women like me either. They just hide it better." Jamila tilted her head, voice even. "So you stepped on the next rung down, because it was easier than reaching back." Claire looked away, not in defiance, but in shame. Then Aiko entered. No announcement, no security escort, just quiet grace and cold precision. "I've spoken with the advisory board," she said, placing a slim laptop on the table. "They're requesting a formal change in the hotel's certification status, unless corrective action is initiated within 48 hours. Mr. Keller nearly choked. "Wait, revoking our rating." Aiko didn't flinch. "Or recalibrating it to reflect current practices." Her gaze moved to Jamila. "We don't remove institutions because they fail. We remove them because they refuse to change." Claire let out a slow breath and finally leaned forward. "So what happens now?" Jamila walked to the center of the room, her laundry badge still clipped to her hip. "What happens now," she said slowly, "is that I help fix what I was once punished for trying to make better." The boardroom door cracked open again. This time, it was Rosa, a housekeeper Jamila had worked alongside for years. She stood nervously, holding a folder. I heard what's happening," she said. I applied last year for the front desk intern program. Never got a reply." She handed the folder to Marcus. It was marked unqualified. "But I speak 4 languages. I thought, maybe I got it wrong." Jamila took the folder gently. "You didn't," she said. "You never did." That moment, one woman stepping forward, because another had shifted the energy in the room completely. Claire swallowed hard. Her defenses thinned. "I thought I was protecting the brand," she muttered half to herself. By silencing the people who were the brand, Jamila replied not cruel, but clear. "The guests never knew our names, Claire. But they remembered how they felt. And they felt safe, not because of chandeliers or overpriced suites, but because people like Rosa smiled at them without needing to say a word." Claire blinked. Her breath caught. And in that blink, Jamila saw at the break. Not the collapse of a villain, but the unraveling of someone who had once believed she was just surviving, and somewhere along the way, became a gatekeeper. "I didn't know how to stop it," Claire said quietly. "The pressure, the metrics, the fear. You stop it." Jamila answered by choosing someone. Even one person. And making sure the door doesn't close behind them. Marcus stood. "Well, let's start right here." He turned to Rosa. "We'll reprocess your application. But not for internship. Guest relations assistant. Effective immediately pending background check." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Jamila touched her hand. You earned this. Long before today. Claire looked up, her face pale. And what about me? The question didn't come with entitlement. Just a hollow honesty. A woman asking if there was a way back from all she'd denied. Jamila was quiet for a moment. Then, that depends. Will you walk back through the door you once guarded and face the hallway you ignored? Claire exhaled. I don't know, but I'll try. Aiko stepped forward, handing Claire a small white card. There's a training program starting next month. It's not mandatory, but it's the beginning of something better, if you want it. Claire stared at the card for a long time. As the meeting wrapped, Jamila stood by the glass wall and looked out over the city she'd only ever seen from service elevators and loading docks. This wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first time she'd seen possibility take shape in the eyes of others. And as they stepped out of the boardroom, Rosa by her side, and Claire trailing a few paces behind, silent, but not absent, Jamila whispered something only Rosa heard. Let's make sure they can't pretend not to see us anymore. Rosa smiled. Starting now. Starting yesterday. Jamila said, walking back into the lobby that had never been meant for her, but that now bore the echo of her voice. Starting yesterday, Jamila said, and with those two words, she claimed more than a hallway. She reclaimed time. Years of being overlooked, misjudged, documented without dignity, swept into folders marked support staff, and locked out of decisions that shaped the very building she kept running. But yesterday wasn't coming back. So she moved forward, and this time she wasn't walking alone. The following morning, the Athena Royal felt different. It wasn't the marble floors or the perfectly trimmed orchids by the fountain. It was something quieter, an undercurrent. The whispers were no longer about scandal. They were about possibility. She's the one, staff murmured in elevators and behind linen carts. She spoke up. She said what we've all swallowed for years. Rosa arrived early, her new guest relations badge pinned slightly crooked on her blazer. She met Jamila near the side entrance, nerves visible in her shoulders. Still doesn't feel real, she said, adjusting the pin. Jamila gave her a reassuring nod. Neither did silence, but we lived in it. And as the two women walked in through the main entrance for the first time, as part of management review, a shift occurred, not in design, but in gravity. Upstairs, Mr. Keller was reviewing compliance checklists when a new alert came through his inbox. Subject line: IAB secondary review, staffing and cultural evaluation. It wasn't just about Jamila anymore. It was about every hiring, promotion, and internal rejection over the past 7 years. There would be interviews, document requests, and recommendations, some of which might cost the hotel its elite accreditation if not implemented swiftly. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was systemic exposure. But for Jamila, it wasn't the paperwork that mattered. It was the truth buried inside it. She spent most of the day conducting quiet interviews with staff cooks, receptionists, janitors, asking questions no one had ever bothered to ask. Have you ever applied for advancement? Did anyone follow up? Was your application reviewed fully? Each time she took notes. Each time she listened without rushing. Every forgotten story added a new layer to the tapestry she was assembling, not of failure, but of silenced potential. By late afternoon, Jamila entered the HR archive room, somewhere she'd only seen in passing before. With a special clearance badge issued just that morning, she logged into the internal system where past applications and hiring notes were stored. And that's where she found it. Her original application, dated, time-stamped, complete, and attached to it, a red flag comment, manually inserted 3 weeks after submission. Applicant, overqualified for intended role. Potential cultural clash with VIP expectations. Recommend internal freeze. Jamila stared at it, breath caught in her throat. Not because she was surprised, but because now it was provable. And next to the comment, a signature: C. Hutchinson. She backed away from the screen slowly. Not with rage, but with clarity. So many decisions had never been about merit. They had been about containment. Keep the help helpful. Keep the face consistent. Keep the power where it felt safe. She printed the record, slid it into a slim folder, and walked toward the executive suite, not to confront, but to present. Claire was already waiting there, seated across from a legal compliance rep from corporate. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked up at Jamila, with a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. "I know why you're here," Claire said quietly. Jamila laid the folder on the table. "You flagged my file, not because I wasn't qualified, but because I didn't fit your image." Claire nodded slowly. "At the time, it felt safer. For the brand, for me. I thought, if I opened the door too wide, I'd be pushed out first." Jamila's voice didn't rise. "You were never meant to guard the door. You were supposed to build more of them." Claire closed her eyes. "And I failed." Jamila exhaled, letting the silence fill the space. "Then, help fix it." That afternoon, Claire submitted a sworn statement, acknowledging her suppression of internal applications under pressure to maintain client comfort expectations. She named names, processes, patterns, not out of self-preservation, but because something in her somewhere had finally decided that protecting a broken system was worse than starting over. Later that day, Aiko received the audit results. She smiled faintly and forwarded the document to 3 partner hotels across the country, adding one line, "This is what reform looks like when it comes from within." But before she closed her laptop, she clicked a private link, a live stream from the Athena's staff training room. On screen, Jamila was teaching her first peer workshop, Cultural Language and Dignity, in guest interaction. And behind her, a projector screen showed a single phrase, "We don't ask people to rise. We build systems that stop holding them down." Downstairs, Rosa assisted her first guest in fluent French. And out on the sidewalk, a new applicant arrived. A Somali-American woman in her 50s, wearing a traditional hijab and carrying a resume with international experience in 6 countries. This time, her file would not be buried, because now someone like Jamila was watching. The new applicant stood at the front desk, her hands clasped tightly around her resume. She glanced around, unsure whether this place, this chandelier-lit monument to luxury, would ever really see her. But behind the reception glass, Rosa spotted her. She smiled rose from her desk and walked over not with rehearsed politeness, but with sincere welcome. "Good afternoon," she said in slow, deliberate English, then switched seamlessly to Somali. "You're here for the interview, aren't you?" The woman's shoulders dropped with relief. She nodded. Rosa didn't need to ask anything else. She simply guided her in, saying gently, "Someone's waiting. Who knows exactly what that silence feels like?" Upstairs, Jamila was in her office now, officially titled Director of Intercultural Strategy and Development. She hadn't changed the furniture. She kept the same black spiral notebook where she scribbled training ideas, questions, names of staff she wanted to mentor. And just below the window, where sunlight filtered through the same blinds, she once walked beneath unseen a single framed photo, sat on her desk, a folded uniform and laundry badge her own pressed and encased in glass. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "You've got 5 minutes before the press roundtable," he said, chuckling softly. "You ready to be the face of what happens when truth finally gets a seat at the table?" Jamila smiled faintly. "I'm ready to say what we weren't allowed to say. And not just for me." She walked toward the staff conference room where regional media had set up cameras and mics. It wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a case study. Athena Royal had gone from a cautionary tale to a national blueprint. The narrative had shifted from public embarrassment to leadership by reform. But Jamila had insisted on one condition: this wasn't going to be a redemption tour. It would be a reckoning. The first question came quickly. A young reporter asked Ms. Brooks, "How did it feel going from laundry services to executive leadership in just weeks?" Jamila didn't flinch. "I didn't change in weeks," she said evenly. "I was always qualified. The only thing that changed was who finally saw me." Another asked, "What's the most important lesson this hotel learned?" Jamila glanced at Rosa, who sat beside her as part of the new inclusion board. "That silence isn't neutral," she said. "It's approval, dressed in politeness." The press conference ended with applause, not because she performed, but because she didn't. She just told the truth, wrapped in the kind of restraint that comes from years of practicing self-erasure. Later that evening, Jamila returned to the staff break room. Not the boardroom, not the executive suite, but the place where she used to eat lunch alone between folding linens. Now it had been converted into a shared space for learning and language exchange. She sat beside Rosa and another new hire, Sophia, the Somali woman, who had just been accepted as a cultural liaison assistant. "You remind me of me," Jamila said, passing her a packet of orientation materials. "Not because of what you wear or where you're from, but because you know how to make yourself small, just to stay in the room." Sophia blinked slowly, her eyes moist. "I didn't think anyone noticed." Jamila replied, "They didn't. But now we see each other." Meanwhile, across town, Claire Hutchinson stepped into a modest building marked Equity Restoration Group, Session Room B. Her clothes were plain. Her expression was unreadable. The woman at the registration desk offered her a waiver form. Claire hesitated, then signed it. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was the first form in a decade she hadn't filled out for someone else. Inside, a semicircle of chairs waited. A few people glanced up as she entered. One nodded. Another looked away. The facilitator, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a kind voice, gestured toward an empty seat. Claire sat. "I'm here because I looked the other way," she said before anyone asked. "And I called that leadership." Back at the hotel, the lobby had taken on a quiet rhythm again. Guests still arrived. Phones still rang. But something was different beneath the surface. You could see it in the way people paused to ask one another's names. In the way Marcus no longer needed to whisper advice from the corner, he gave it openly, now knowing it would be heard. And that night, after the last guest had checked in and the elevators quieted, Jamila walked alone to the linen floor where it all started. The room smelled the same clean cotton warm steam, a trace of lemon from the softener. She stood in the center of it and closed her eyes. This room had once been her boundary, a safe place, but also a cage. She had folded silence into corners for years. Now she unfolded something else. She opened her notebook and scribbled one line under tomorrow's meeting notes. "We don't rise by being exceptional. We rise by being seen." And just before she turned out the lights, she taped that page to the inside of the door. Not for her, but for the next woman who would walk in, shoulders hunched from being overlooked. And for the first time in a long time, Jamila didn't feel like she was borrowing space. She knew she belonged. The next woman, who walked into the linen room 2 days later, noticed the handwritten page taped to the inside of the door. She paused, reading Jamila's words silently. "We don't rise by being exceptional. We rise by being seen." Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper like it was a relic, not a memo. Her name was Alondra Morales, a first-year hospitality intern with calloused hands, a shy gait, and the quiet belief that she'd never be more than someone folding sheets behind the scenes. But that note, that told a different story. And it wasn't just Alondra who noticed. In the weeks that followed, quiet changes rippled through the Athena Royal, not with slogans or posters, but with moments. The kind that made people pause. Rosa began hosting language hours, where staff taught each other basic phrases from their native tongues. Sophia developed cultural guides for incoming employees. Even the way morning briefings were held changed, rotating speakers round tables instead of podiums, no more us and them. Jamila watched all of it unfold, not as the star, but as the thread pulling quiet dignity into the fabric of the hotel's culture. And yet, amid the progress, there was still one story left unfinished. It was Claire. One afternoon, Marcus knocked gently on Jamila's door. He didn't speak right away, just held out a manila envelope. Inside, a typed letter. No logo, no hotel header, just a signature: Claire Hutchinson. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," the letter read. I'm asking for accountability that starts with me. I joined a bias training cohort in DC, not to get certified, but to understand how I built walls and called them standards. If there's a way back, it's only if I help tear those walls down. You don't owe me a response, but you deserve to know I'm trying. Jamila read it twice, not because she didn't understand, but because she wanted to feel the weight of someone owning their harm. She placed the letter in her bottom drawer, not to forget it, but to mark where the apology stopped and the action would need to begin. That same evening, an unexpected invitation arrived at her inbox from the National Conference on Hospitality Equity, requesting Jamila to keynote their closing ceremony in Chicago. "We want to hear how reform actually lives in a building," the note said, not just how it's written in a report. Jamila hesitated. She had spent so much of her life surviving in rooms that weren't built for her. Did she want to step into one more spotlight? Marcus, ever perceptive, noticed her silence. "You don't have to be their symbol," he said gently. "But if you speak, speak as the woman who rewrote the script, not the woman they want to showcase." She agreed. The following week, she stood before an audience of 900 industry leaders. No suit, no designer heels. She wore the same polished flats she used to work 12-hour shifts in, and a deep navy blouse embroidered with her mother's initials near the sleeve cuff. She began without preamble. "I was never invisible," she said. "You just weren't looking." Gasps. Then silence. Then scribbles of pens trying to catch every word. Jamila spoke not of policy, but of feeling. Of being overqualified and unseen. Of folding linens while listening to executives complain about accents. Of watching leaders fear unfamiliar names on applications. And finally of what happened when one guest refused to let her dignity be ignored, and when she at last refused to let hers be buried. Her closing line wasn't rehearsed. It's not the chandeliers or the thread count that defines excellence. It's whether the people scrubbing the floors feel like their voice matters as much as the ones checking in. Standing ovation. Afterward, Aiko found her backstage eyes glinting with pride. "I always believed you belonged in rooms like this," she said. "But the world needed you to walk in as yourself, not who they imagined you should be." Jamila smiled. "That's the only version I've got." 2 months later, Athena Royal was certified as the first cultural equity beacon site in the region. Jamila refused to let the plaque be hung in the front lobby. She had it installed beside the staff entrance, where it means something, she explained. And every new hire, before they learn to use the hotel's digital check-in system or towel folding protocol, now starts with a single page of reading a printed quote framed under glass beside a laundry badge. "We don't rise by being exceptional. We rise by being seen." The system hadn't just changed its rules. It had changed its lens. And it all began with one woman who refused to stay silent in a room full of translation. The marble floors still shine. But now, so do the names.